I welcome you all to this first Arctic Circle virtual broadcast of 2021. And today we are indeed honored to have the President of Estonia presenting the case of why this great country is applying for observer status in the Arctic Council. I think it demonstrates the growing interest in Arctic affairs, that it's only just over 7 years since the Kiruna meeting in Sweden of the foreign ministers of the Arctic states, the members of the Arctic Council, approved the observer status of countries like India, China, Singapore, and others. And since then, we have had Switzerland on the basis of its scientific contribution to glacial research, also becoming an observer state in the Arctic Council. The decision by Estonia to apply opens fascinating new dimensions in the global interest in the Arctic and the wide-ranging, especially European participation, because if you look at the Baltic area with Russia, Sweden, Finland, Norway, Denmark being Arctic states, full members of the Arctic Council, and then Germany and Poland being observer states, the addition of Estonia to this Arctic family and the Arctic Council table would indeed be fascinating for that region as well as the Arctic in general. We are especially pleased that today we have participants from 37 countries who are now listening to this dialogue, as well as many of them putting questions to the president. And they come from different continents, from not only Europe and Asia, but also Africa, Latin America, as well as United States and North America. And the fact that we have participants today from 37 countries on 5 continents is a manifestation of the great global interest in the Arctic. So, Madam President, this shows indeed that there is already a great anticipation and interest in the application of Estonia. So I now invite you to make your opening remarks, and following that, we will put the questions from many different countries to you. Please.
Thank you for all these kind words, and thank you all the participants for taking interest into Estonia and the Estonian application to become the observer in the Arctic Council. Estonia has been gradually over the last 30 years evolving on international scene and taking more and more multilateral responsibility, trying to be present, visible, and contribute with what we can do and where we hope we have some competitive advantage as well. It's only indeed 30 years this year since Iceland, as a first country from Western world, recognized Estonia as a newly again independent country, and we joined or rejoined the United Nations. This year we are sitting behind the table of Security Council in the United Nations, the world's most difficult negotiating table of all. We are also quite active in cooperation with developing nations, for example, with African Union. We work on digital issues. And we feel that our outreach, as we go stronger and more experienced, also can reach to the levels where we cooperate in organizations, where we work on the effects of the climate change, where we discuss the future of our whole planet, and where also quite a lot of research contribution is needed from all participants. Probably the listeners today do not know that Estonia has a polar research expertise that goes back to Estonian Baltic Germans, for example, Admiral Bellingshausen, who 201 years ago first sighted Antarctica, actually comes from the island of Saaremaa, the Estonian biggest island, and was sailing indeed in the Russian fleet, but has roots where I do, for example, the same island. There's also Wrangel and Baer. They are both also the Baltic Germans. They did research long before the International Polar Year of 1882. And even during the Soviet occupation, Estonian scientists were able to participate in Arctic expeditions and cooperated with colleagues from Moscow and St. Petersburg. After our restoration of independence in 1991, Estonia's primary research partners have been the Nordic countries, the European Union and Russia when it concerns the Arctic cooperation and the polar research. Polar Research Committee has been operating in Estonian Academy of Sciences since 1993. And since 2001, the Estonian Academy of Sciences is a member of the European Polar Board. So a lot of groundwork has been laid, and hence we feel we can contribute in the wider cooperation to save our planet. And saving our planet starts from Arctic, because Arctic is the most sensitive part of the world, which is currently suffering more than any other region globally from the global warming. Estonia, as the member of the European Union, of course, is also the part of the neutrality pledge of 2050. But we are also feeling, looking at the data from the scientists, that maybe we should try to do something even quicker and move faster, because we all see that when there have been predictions about the Arctic warming, all these predictions have been actually undershooting. Arctic is warming much quicker. And it is, of course, also important that Estonia is quite close to the Arctic Circle. It's probably the northernmost country which is not yet part of the Arctic Council. So in our way, we are seeking now to become observers, to become contributors, to work with the scientific community and the political community to make sure that our Arctic is preserved. And also there is a domestic element in this pledge. Estonia is a country which is part of quite quickly developing countries. It has risen to the ranks of the rich countries, even if it is still at its lower end. But we still sometimes feel that we are small and we're not so rich, and stopping the climate change is not in our hands, or not even sometimes our business, if you talk to Estonian people. So by becoming part of this extensive community fighting for Arctic, fighting for the future of the planet while we are fighting for the Arctic, we also hope to make fighting the climate change more understandable for our own people. We are not many, a nation of 1 million, but we want to contribute, and for that we also need to understand better what partners, neighbors, allies in Arctic Council are thinking. And also not only up north, but down south, because we all know that the other end of the world, Antarctic, is suffering similar fate like is our Arctic right now. Estonia sent out last year a ship called Admiral Bellingshausen, which visited Antarctica at the anniversary 200th birthday of the discovery of Antarctica. We celebrated it together with our friends in Antarctica, also in the Russian Arctic base, Admiral Bellingshausen. And this ship is now next summer sailing to north, to the Arctic areas. So we are, through these expeditions, commemorating the history of polar expeditions and showing to our people and young people what science can do, because this ship is also always carrying scientists to south and north to make sure that they can educate our people and people elsewhere, if they so wish, of the effects of what humankind is having on our planet. Thank you. This is all for initial remarks, and I'm ready to answer all the questions you have for me.
Well, thank you very much. Indeed, a very formidable case, if I may say so. And although I thought I knew a lot about Estonia, I must say some of the historical facts that you described about your scientific involvement early on and the role your country has been playing was actually new to me. So it has indeed been quite fascinating to see the emphasis of your presentation. As I said in the beginning, we have received questions from many different countries. And the first one comes actually from Portugal. But the essence is to ask when you understood that your participation in the Arctic Council would make a difference, or as she puts it, what was the trigger of that awakening?
There is no trigger, but we kind of gradually grew into understanding that our contribution to multilateral communities can be significant. There are very few of us, but we can act as a catalyst. We have been acting as a catalyst of digital governance, as probably also people in Portugal know, because Portugal is a quick adapter and is also quite digital in its governance. We have realized that our experience of leapfrogging with the help of technology provides an hopeful story for other nations struggling to develop quickly economically. We've always known that we have great scientific community. The best university in Estonia, University of Tartu, is among the 300 best universities globally and the best university in the countries which formerly were behind the Iron Curtain. And as I said already, there is a lot of polar research which Estonians are doing anyway. So we are kind of growing into understanding that our place is behind the table of Arctic Council and as an observer. And of course, if many of these elements also existed, let's say 20 years ago, but the country needs to have a certain presence, a certain understanding of international scene already, to start taking more responsibility. And we feel that right now we have already the knowledge, the experience, and the readiness to not only observe, but actively participate and contribute.
Well, thank you very much for that. We might come a little later to the digital and information science and technology contribution that Estonia could make to the Arctic. But let me go to the next question, which is put by a distinguished professor at the Arctic University in Norway, who is well known to the Arctic community. And of course, he goes straight to the heart of the political challenge and asks, what role can the Arctic Council observer status play in the relationship between Estonia and Russia? And as we are all aware, in a few months' time, Russia will take over the chair of the Arctic Council. He also has a follow-up question, but I will come to that after your response to this one.
Yes, thank you. Estonia and Russia are neighbors, and we actually cooperate best in the areas where neighbors normally do. Environment, keeping the 5th biggest lake in Europe as clean as possible, Lake Peipus, which is the border lake between the two of us, cooperation between universities, cooperation between scientists. This is what we have always been doing, despite the fact that indeed Estonia, as all European democratic nations, have quite strong question marks about what Russia is and wants to be in next 10, 20, 30 and 100 years in our global community. Estonia, as part of the European Union, applies and always stands by the 5 principles agreed by the European Union when we discuss our political relations with Russia. But in Arctic Council and between the scientists, this is the area where I believe we can keep up and develop a strong grassroots level cooperation as well. And as it is with difficult discussions, it's always good to have also areas and subjects where you can be on a more neutral ground. So definitely Arctic Council for us is one of these grounds. As I said already, in celebrating 200 years from the discovery of Antarctica, we have been cooperating. And our scientists, particularly in hydrobiology, work very closely together every day. So we see our relations in Arctic Council as a continuation of what we have been able to build over the last 30 years, despite the politically difficult relations, which we don't shy away from at all. The right of Ukrainian people, Georgian people, Belarusian people to decide for themselves is very important for Estonians.
Do I understand you correctly that you see the opportunities and the potential that would be involved in Estonia being an observer state in the Arctic Council as a way to increase and enhance your cooperation with Russia?
Definitely so. And as I said, indeed, if we have difficulties of opinion, we keep talking to each other. We need to talk to our neighbor because even if we don't agree, we need at least to understand each other's thinking, and no problem in the world has been resolved by shying away from a dialogue. And Arctic Council for us is yet another opportunity for open dialogue.
And this brings me to the follow-up question from our friend from Norway, where he directly asks about how your observer status would affect the EU-NATO relations with Russia in the Baltic region.
In my mind, they don't. I mean, our cooperation has always been built where we can, and our differences of opinion have always been also important. It is not an easy relationship, neither between EU, Russia, NATO, Russia, Estonia, Russia, but being an observer in Arctic Council is not going to change that. On the other hand, having more and more people cooperating for the good of our planet on a kind of a different level of multilateralism, because I mean, when we are discussing climate change, we are all in this together. There is no bigger objective for 21st century international cooperation than fighting the climate change, stopping the climate change and saving the planet for our children. And there is no geography, no compartmentalization in this, because in principle, climate change affects everybody, everywhere, globally. You cannot kind of limit this process to any region, and hence I believe that lots and lots of differences of opinion need to be left behind the door to commonly fight this ground.
There is certainly among the audience joining this dialogue a great interest in the relationship between Russia and Estonia and how the Arctic Council observer status would impact on that. And we have a question from Austria on that subject also, which is, does Estonia see Russia as a hindrance to your application? And let me again draw the attention to the fact due to the rotation of the chairmanships in the Arctic Council, that it so happens that the first meeting where your formal application will be on the table of the foreign ministers of the Arctic Council, Arctic states, will be the one where Russia takes over from Iceland as the chair of the Arctic Council.
Interestingly, and again, for people listening in from Austria and even further afield, you probably don't know that Estonia and Russia are working quite closely on some issues which are dear to many nations around the Arctic Circle, and this is the indigenous people of the region. Many of the indigenous people within Russia are actually Finno-Ugric, as are Estonians and Finns and Hungarians, by the way. These are the three nations who have a state and are Finno-Ugric. And only next summer we are planning to organize a Finno-Ugric World Congress in Estonia. It was supposed to already take place last summer. And heads of states from countries where there are Finno-Ugric nations present always come to these conferences. Sometimes they organized in Russia, sometimes elsewhere. Not everybody comes all the time, but for example, President Putin is also invited and hopefully will be present at this summit. So we do work on various issues, and not all of them are difficult. Sometimes this discussion, by the way, also has been quite difficult to have, because the Finno-Ugric people within Russia they are sometimes worried about the sustainability of their culture and their language, but we're always ready to help, always ready to work with them. And I believe, therefore, that if you took the wider view of Estonian and Russian cooperation, science, work with indigenous people, well, I don't see the reason why we cannot work well in Arctic Council, where I know that the discussion very often centers on what is really the subject matter, unhindered by the otherwise difficult relations which the countries can have. So I'm expecting and I'm fully hoping that this will be indeed the case also for us and our reception to the Circle of Nations active in the Arctic Circle.
Well, before I go to the next question, which is on a different aspect of the Arctic cooperation, can I ask you two things? The first is, have you already discussed this with senior Russian representatives?
Not yet. At my level, my last discussion with President Putin was narrowly limited to the pandemic debate we had to close the border between the two countries, etc. But I am quite sure that we are able to have a debate and a discussion also about this.
My second question is that, as you know, the preeminent Russian platform on the Arctic is the Arctic Territorial Dialogue Conference, which takes place every second year and has been moved to St. Petersburg in recent years, and it's become a great platform where President Putin always attends, and a number of others from the Russian leadership, as well as international participants. So would you be open to an invitation to come to the next St. Petersburg Arctic Territorial Dialogue Conference and state your case there if the Russians invite you?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Looking forward to see you there. Yes. At the last meeting, the prime ministers of Norway and Sweden and the presidents of Finland and Iceland were on the stage with President Putin. So you would indeed be in good company. The next question is actually from Russia, but it's on a different aspect of the Arctic cooperation. It's about Arctic shipping. And as you know, the melting of the Arctic sea ice has opened new sea routes, and that is happening earlier than most people expected. And there is a big discussion of whether the growth of Arctic shipping should follow international regulations of shipping or national rules, for example, Russian rules, indicating that one of these three sea routes, the eastern sea routes along the Russian coast, would be largely within the Russian territory, but then we have the center route across the pole, as well as the northwest passage. Have you formulated some kind of a position on what the Estonian view on the future of Arctic shipping would be?
Well, by the instinct of a small open economy, what Estonia is, and a small nation which is very dependent on international agreements and international law, there is no question that Estonia definitely sees the future in agreed international regulations. But of course, countries closest to the Arctic and who have already the presence and who have also to a certain extent traditions will have a say in setting and developing this international understanding on cooperation also in Arctic shipping.
But one of the aspects of future transport from Asia to Europe through the Arctic is, of course, this project that the Norwegians and the Finns have been working on, also in cooperation with other partners, to use Kirkenes in Norway as a hub for the ships coming in, and then have a railway link into Finland, and from Finland through your country and other countries down to the European continent. What is your view of mega projects of this scale that could make your country, your neighboring countries like Finland and Norway, a new type of global hub for the 21st century transport system that would emerge through the Northern Sea route.
We have foreseen such an opportunity, and this is part of the reasoning why Estonia has presented already, I believe, 2 financial perspectives ago in the European Union, the Rail Baltic project as a Connecting Europe facility project. So in cooperation with the European Union, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, we are constructing the Rail Baltic Railway. Estonia, Finland are also discussing that maybe sometimes in the future, if there is the railway, we could have a tunnel between the 2 countries, etc. So we have been quite forward-looking on this. On the other hand, if I look at what scientists are telling me, then all the sea routes in the Arctic, they would be for considerable time, well, unpredictably accessible. I mean, they are opening and closing, the ice is moving, the ice is coming and going. And we are not so close to having a reliable passage, and I'm not so sure I want to have, because after all, we want Arctic to retain its ice coverage as much as possible, even if we know that, I mean, right now things are looking relatively bad. But indeed, the north-south transport corridors are, well, under development here in Estonia, because we believe that even if these passages will not be so quickly usable as our railway will be built, we still see that quite a lot of north-south traffic could be better organized and also in a more climate-friendly way if it is taken away from ships and put on railways, well, before it goes towards Central Europe. It's also much quicker and the arrival times become much more predictable.
Well, there are many people, as you have indicated, that are skeptical about the emergence of these sea routes. But I have to tell you from my experience, this has been happening much faster and on a bigger scale than any of us expected sort of 20 years ago. The big Chinese shipping company COSCO has now for more than half a decade had a formal Arctic shipping strategy. Korea, meaning South Korea, has also had a strategy of building Arctic ships, container ships, and those transporting LNG that can travel the Arctic without having an icebreaker. So you have the largest shipping company in China, you have one of the largest shipping countries in the world, like South Korea, actively now investing big time in the future of Arctic shipping. And therefore, if you take Zapeta in Russia, which nobody of us had heard of sort of 5 years ago, and is now one of the major global LNG hubs, where there was just the frozen tundra before. Now there's a big harbor, and you have Japan, Korea, China doing energy business with Russia through this Arctic harbor. If we look at all of that, the fact of the matter is that these things have happened quicker than even the most enlightened and the most informed people thought possible 10 or 20 years ago. So that is why I personally think countries like yours and mine, who could play a role in this new transport system, should actively start discussing and planning for this future before it sort of hits us hard. But let me bring you back to the information technology, because we have a question from Canada, which relates to the importance of connectivity in the Arctic, which of course is a great problem. I often remind people the size of the Arctic, if you add it all up, it's almost the size of Africa, if you put it all together. So the question is, in improving connectivity and information sharing in the Arctic, how could the Estonian phenomenal experience of using information technology for a new type of 21st century governance be a relevant contribution to the Arctic cooperation? You talked a little bit about that before, but maybe you can elaborate on that some more.
Yes, before I turn to digital, I would like to also say a few words about the sea passage. I know it's developing quite quickly and a lot of investment is made, but about 20 convoys per year is not the volume which is rapidly growing. We can see that indeed these convoys find it difficult to pass the passage, and that is the reason why the reliability of the delivery has been always a question. And I always feel a little bit uneasy when we are, and we will be, and I know that we are taking advantage of something which actually we are regretting, which is the Arctic melting, the melting of the tundra, etc. And I'm not so sure LNG will be part of our energy mix for a very long time. At least I am an idealist. I believe that all countries can rely on totally renewable sources. Iceland can, of course. Not everybody is so lucky, but we have some things. We don't have fire, but we have wind, and hence it's always a little bit difficult to say yes. I mean, these are the great perspectives when we know that they stem from something which actually paradoxically is not something we want to have. Now to the digital cooperation. Estonia indeed is a country which delivers all its public service online, and we are very used to thinking that all logistics operations can be done online. We are working with international organizations, for example, World Health Organization, to develop international digitized systems. For example, a global vaccination passport project in World Health Organization is an Estonian development. Together with International Telecommunication Union, Estonian companies are developing a toolbox of Lego pieces for governments to provide public services. Hence, for us, it is totally understandable to think of the world as data which need to be shared, which need to be analyzed, which need to be protected. And also we can very easily see the polar developments as a lot of data which need to be gathered, collected, shared, analyzed, and developed. For that, we need less and less the presence of people. My climate advisor here in Estonian President's Office, Timo Palo, was part of the team of the French ship Tara, which drifted across the Arctic to gather scientific data. Estonia nowadays is making unmanned platforms which can transport all kinds of equipment and keep in communication with people who are relatively far away. These platforms probably are easier to allow to get stuck in Arctic ice and then deliver us information and data. And this is something which for Estonians comes quite naturally, to think that all our data is for protecting, but also for sharing and working on together. So wherever you are looking and you see that you want to know something, then there is a digital way of finding what already exists, creating the rest, and then analyzing and sharing. Data sharing, data pools, this is something which Estonia is currently also actively working with in the European Union, also making sure that while we need data security, we still need it to be, mineable, accessible, useful. Two things can go together. This is for us the very important slogan, and we are ready to share our experiences and work with all other Arctic Council nations in order to make this data representation of the Arctic also happen.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think the experience and the know-how that you have established in this field could be of great use to the Arctic, because one of the big challenges is how the smaller communities, small on the global scale, that are spread over this vast territory from Alaska through Canada, into Greenland, and then into Russia. And I say again, a territory, if you add it all up, is the size of Africa, is one of the key questions of whether the Arctic can join. The people of the Arctic can join the global community. The next question comes from Denmark, asking whether you have discussed your application with any of the Arctic states. I already asked you about Russia, but maybe you can comment with respect to others. Some of them are your close neighbors, of course.
Definitely. in fact, into my mind, this idea that Estonia could be closer to Arctic Council was put by my Finnish counterpart, President Sauli Niinistö, at our first meeting, said that Estonia should and could consider coming closer to the Arctic Council and the Arctic cooperation, because you are, after all, close by. And of course, I've been talking, we have even during this pandemic kept up our relations with our neighbors, me and also the ministers of Estonia, our diplomats. We've all been talking about this even before our application, because before you submit your application, you need to gather information, how people would feel about it. So indeed, of course, we have been doing this work. And as I said, we are just exited a year ago the United Nations Security Council campaign, when we made a lot of global friends and learned to put ourselves into the shoes of other people to be part of multilateral communities. We all still retain the effects of this training and indeed are quite confident that there is value in what we have learned, and also it will help us to contribute.
Can I just add to that question? As you are well aware, the Trump administration changed the US policy with respect to the Arctic, bringing in a more geopolitical dimension, a more security dimension. The Pompeo speech in Finland a year and a half ago, this whole idea about Greenland, although people laughed at the tweet, there was a certain seriousness behind it. And of course, US has opened a consulate in Nuuk in Greenland. Whereas the Biden administration will probably be more interested in the climate effect, and John Kerry, who will be the global climate representative, was given the Arctic Circle Prize at the last Arctic Circle Assembly. Can I ask you to reflect a little bit on the Trump versus the Biden administration and the US role in the Arctic as you see it?
Well, definitely we will see that there will be a pendulum shift towards much more eager multilateral cooperation, and the habitude and the history of this kind of international and multilateral cooperation, thinking also of John Kerry, for example, here. So I feel confident and secure in looking forward into cooperation with the United States, also in the Arctic Council. And the emphasis shift towards climate issue, I believe it should be welcomed. It should be truly welcomed. Nevertheless, of course, the security in the Arctic region is also something which we cannot overlook, and need to find fora to discuss this. And I'm quite sure that US will continue using also Arctic Council to have peaceful, calm, let's say, meditations about what could be done together and for the better of all of us.
Well, we have a few more questions, and let's try to get through them before our time is up. The next one, although you have dealt with it a little bit, is from Iceland. And it brings up the example of Switzerland, which focused on scientific cooperation in their observer application. You have already outlined the Estonian scientific contribution. Would you like to add something to that before we go on to the next question?
Absolutely. The Center of Biorobotics from Tallinn Technical University has experience in creating and using self-propelled and autonomous robots for researching marine life cycles. The University of Tartu has know-how of the novel DNA-based description of Arctic species, analyzing and improving the resilience of Arctic ecosystems, quantifying carbon cycles. The University of Life Sciences carries competence in understanding plant physiology and associated aspects of biodiversity, and so on. So we have a lot to offer also in the form of the scientific cooperation. In addition, there are about 200-300 clean technology enterprises operating in Estonia. As you know, Estonia is a breeding ground for unicorns, and startup sector is extremely strong in Estonia. So we are bringing all these elements behind the table, and are, of course, ready to use our strength the best way also as an observers for the Arctic Council. There is no doubt about it. Everybody, when they come to multilateral fora, they export, they present what they can offer the best. Digital transformation, startup culture, no fear of new technologies, readiness to try and err. These are something which Estonia has.
Next question is also from Iceland, and it's quite short. It's whether you expect Lithuania and Latvia to also apply for observer status in the Arctic Council.
Despite the fact that our friends very often refer to three of us as Baltic nations, and I'm quite happy to sometimes represent a Baltic nation, we do take our decisions separately, and I cannot really speak for Latvia and Lithuania. You have to ask them. I'm sorry. Oh. But personally, I would very much welcome if we, if all three of us took keen interest in the Arctic matters. As we said, climate change, the changes in Arctic, they are directly affecting the Baltic climate, and therefore we all are terribly interested and need to contribute.
The next question comes from Ireland, and you referred earlier to Estonia being the northernmost non-Arctic country. But the question relates to your opinion on China as a near-Arctic country. I would like to remind you what Secretary Pompeo said in Finland at the last ministerial meeting, that China could not claim to be in any way a near-Arctic country. So you have a viewpoint on China as a near-Arctic country?
China is a country which development has been fascinating all of us, and also we have been, well, interested to know, but all left guessing on what it plans to do with this economic might which it has gained through this really admirable technological development and economic development. It is quite unclear how China sees its role and plans to exercise this economic might on international multilateral scene. And as we remain perplexed about that, then this lack of understanding actually affects quite a lot of our thinking about cooperation with China in all multilateral organizations and multilateral fora.
The follow-up question also from Ireland is in a way more pointed. It is whether you see China and Russia as a threat to the Arctic.
Well, Russia is in Arctic, so it definitely belongs to the nations which closely work and cooperate when we discuss the Arctic issues. What comes to the geopolitical issues, then definitely Russia's action, let's say, from the war in Georgia cannot be considered but something which tries to change how we see how the international cooperation works, from rules-based back to the interest and power-based. And we, of course, are strongly opposed to these kind of developments. So we cooperate despite understanding that there are considerable threats stemming from the unpredictability. The unpredictabilities about China, I explained. The unpredictabilities about Russia have been pointedly demonstrated in Georgia, in Ukraine, and therefore we need to be wary. Nevertheless, as I already said, this is our neighboring country. We have to also talk to each other where we can and cooperate where we can. It helps with the tensions normally.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President, for this extraordinary, extensive, analytical tour de force and explaining the many dimensions of your application for observer status in the Arctic Council. I think this dialogue has definitely proved that Estonia can contribute in a great many different ways to the Arctic dialogue. So I thank you very much for giving the global audience the opportunity to listen to your case. We will, of course, as you know, in the coming days, publicize this dialogue on the Arctic Circle social media platforms. And therefore, what you said here today will carry on being an important part of the Arctic dialogue. And I'm absolutely sure that many of your answers will be analyzed thoroughly in the capitals of at least some of the Arctic states. So thank you very much. Let me reiterate the invitation to you to come to the next Arctic Circle Assembly, which will also give you an opportunity to hold many meetings. I have had the privilege to witness you in operation at the München Security Council and other international gatherings, so I can bear witness to how effective you are in personally as president of your country in these gatherings. And I can assure you the Arctic Circle Assembly, as well as the forums, for example, the one in Berlin, can give you and your colleagues in Estonia enormous opportunities to broaden your Arctic network. So thank you again for your presence here today. Let me also take this opportunity to announce that next week the Arctic Circle will be launching what we call the Arctic Circle Journal. It will have its home on our website, and it's a new way to allow memorandums, articles, documents of great relevance to the Arctic dialogue to be published in this form. And we will announce that in more detail after the weekend. And the first article to be published in the Arctic Circle Journal will be a memorandum by the former Russian ambassador to Iceland, Anton Vasiliev, who was also for a number of years the senior Arctic official of Russia, where he explains the new Arctic policy of the Russian Federation, which in many ways is an eye-opening document about the importance which the Russian government puts to the Arctic. So I would invite all of you to take a look at the new Arctic Circle platform, the Arctic Circle Journal, as we launch it next week. And with these words, I thank all the participants from 37 countries on 5 different continents to having been part of the first international presentation of the case for Estonia as an observer state in the Arctic Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you.